Hey everyone, welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we're still in the little part of Acts that we are in between First and Second Corinthians. And so this is a really short section, but it's actually kind of pivotal. It's 2 verses, but um, there's a lot in here that we can pull out and look at. So nothing really deep, but it kind of gives us an introduction into Second Corinthians, and some little bit of history that happened between the first two letters. So we'll look at that today. And like, for those who are not used to this, or this is your first time seeing this, we're doing a chronological study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And this is just part of what we do, kind of go in Acts a little bit and come out of Acts as Paul visited these places and wrote letters to them. So Acts 20 verses 1 and 2, real short. When the uproar was over, talking about the riot that we looked at yesterday, Paul sent for the believers and encouraged them. Then he said goodbye and left for Macedonia. While there, he encouraged the believers in all the towns he passed through. Then he traveled down to Greece. And so again, just a short section here. So what we see is that Paul departed from Ephesus for Macedonia. That most people believe, or most scholars believe, that he went to Philippi first. And in the final days of his Ephesian ministry, after writing First Corinthians, Paul had considerable conflict with the Corinthian church. When we kind of see a little bit of that in First Corinthians, and he made a painful visit to them, probably by sea, probably went by sea, and then he wrote what he refers to as a tearful letter upon his return to Ephesus. So after First Corinthians, he went and visited them, and then he left, and then he wrote them what I said, like he said, a tearful letter, and which at first he actually talks about regretting sin, and we'll see that when we start studying Second Corinthians. And as his time in Ephesus neared its completion, Paul wanted to return to Corinth, but feared how he might be received after having sent this harsh letter. Now, we don't know anything about this letter. It's a lost letter. There's a couple letters that between the Corinthian church and Paul that we just don't know. There was letters, or a letter that they wrote to Paul before he wrote First Corinthians, that we don't know. And then there's this second letter that Paul wrote here that we don't know anything about. We haven't seen, and I'm guessing whatever the content was and what it was needed for just the church and not for all of us. And so it's just, it didn't make it through history. So he does this, and so, but again, like I said, he was fearful of how they would react to the harsh letter that he had sent, and so he eventually sent Titus ahead of him to test the waters at Corinth. And then upon leaving Ephesus, Paul, he didn't go directly by Corinth by sea. He kind of took his time to go there. Just how we can be sometimes, right? We like, man, I don't know if I really want to go into this situation. This has been bad. Let me take my time and go around. And so he first went north, and he visited the Christian communities along the way, hoping then to meet up with Titus returning from Corinth. He went to Troas, and then possibly onto other churches in Macedonia, where we see a little bit of reference to this again in Second Corinthians. We'll look at that. And then in Macedonia, Titus finally joins him and brought the good news that the church had repented, right? After Paul's letter, of its oppositions to Paul's leadership. And we're going to see some of this as we go into Second Corinthians, and that they had reconciled to him. All right, so this, whatever was going on, this little fight, this disruption that was going on between Paul and the Corinthian church, that was settled now, and that's then when Paul wrote Second Corinthians. And then after writing Second Corinthians, he then travels to Corinth, where he spends 3 months. We'll see that. And then there in Corinth is where he writes Romans, which is one of his greatest theological work. And it's going to be, I know, a task for me when we go through Romans, but I think for all of y'all, I mean, Romans is the deep study, right? That is some of his deepest work, and definitely his greatest theological work. And so he wrote that to prepare for his visit to the church at Rome, which we're going to see that. So that's kind of a lot of history that we see there that happened in kind of summed up in 2 verses of Acts. And we'll cover a little bit more of this tomorrow, just looking at it. We're going to see, we're going to start tomorrow. We're going to roll into Second Corinthians 1, which is a greetings from Paul. And we'll look at some of the issues, what happened on the lost letter, and those type of things that that was going on between Paul and the Corinthian church. So, as always, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch these. I know this is a short one, but again, nothing real deep here, just a little bit of history, a little introduction before we roll into Second Corinthians so you have an understanding. Again, what I like to do is I like for you to understand the context of the letters that we're going into, because that makes a difference, right? Because if you read these letters out of context, and out of order without understanding what was going on, well, you can come up with a lot of theological things that probably shouldn't be. And we have done that in the Christian community, in the churches. And so this is why it's so important to understand and have a background, and not just read one or two verses and be like, oh man, we need to apply this to all things all the time, and get an understanding of why Paul was writing what he was writing. And so we have an understanding of it as we go through this and continue to study this. So, as always, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch these. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, go ahead and do that. That will, allow you to get the notifications when we do this. But more than anything, I just really do appreciate those who take the time to watch.